Our first guest tonight was at that bipartisan meeting with the president this afternoon at the White House. Joining us from the White House, House Minority Whip Steve Scalise. Congressman, great to have you with us. That must have been quite a meeting. Let's start with the fact that this president is standing by his decision to withdraw our troops from northern Syria, and that's been met with considerable opposition from both parties. The reasoning?
Well, Lou, first of all, it was a meeting where we were really initially going to talk through some of those differences and really, I think, talk with the president about some of our shared objectives, and that is, one, to keep ISIS at bay, to prevent Turkey from coming in and running roughshod over Turks and having some kind of slaughter out there, and to make sure that we don't see Turkey ally too much more with Russia than they already are. And the president showed us the letter at that meeting. It was a very tough letter. I thought a very good letter directed at President Erdogan to let him know we're serious about sanctions. And Secretary Mnuchin was there to talk through the sanctions that we're already imposing against Turkey just this week because of the aggressive actions that they're taking. And that's when things, I thought, got a bit contentious, and you saw Pelosi, you know, she was saying some things after the meeting. She stormed out of the meeting. She was saying some things about the meeting that really weren't the case. We actually had a very civil conversation after she and Chuck Schumer and Steny Hoyer stormed out, and there were other Democrats still in that meeting, by the way, where we actually talked through how we can achieve some of the similar objectives we have of continuing the fight against ISIS.
Well, Congressman, let me ask you this. It sounds like you had a good meeting when it was a one-sided meeting, if you will.
Well, there were Democrats still there, but it was contentious when Speaker Pelosi and Chuck Schumer were really going back and forth with the president. I think you saw the president release some pictures just recently on Twitter that showed who was really, I think, showing the aggression. I think it's important to show that.
Well, there you are. This just, set up. But, when you talk about them storming out of the meeting, two thoughts occur to me, Congressman. One is it was their turn. He had stormed out of the last so-called bipartisan meeting, right? And secondly, why in the world should a president of the United States put up with nonsense from the very people who are trying to overthrow his presidency? My God, I have to give him credit for even inviting them, don't you?
Well, I thought it was gracious on his part to invite them there, and the fact that Pelosi has been on this drumbeat to impeach the president, regardless of fact, behind closed doors with Adam Schiff, literally trying to overturn the results of the 2016 election behind closed doors. And I think that's something people all across the country are disgusted by.
I have to be honest with you. I'd have called her a lot worse than a third-rate politician, because I think she's a lot worse than a third-rate politician to be carrying out such an assault on the president of the United States, don't you?
Well, it goes against the very foundation of what our founders set up when they put the power of impeachment in the Constitution. The standard was high crimes and misdemeanors. And by the way, and this only 3 times in our country's history has the House moved forward with impeachment inquiry. And every single time there was a full vote of the House. Everybody was held accountable. And Pelosi is shielding her vulnerable members from that vote. While they're hiding behind secret, they won't even let rank and file members, by the way, go and read the transcript of the Volcker testimony, for example, where they were leaking out things that turned out to be inaccurate. A rank and file member, Republican or Democrat, can't even go read what happened in that secret hearing.
Congressman, I think you're being very generous. So far, everything they have averred has been an absolute lie. Whether it be the third-rate whistleblower with his third-party hearsay.
Who they're trying to hide the name of the whistleblower who's trying to take down a president of the United States. Schiff is the same person conducting this hearing that said for 2 years that he had more than circumstantial evidence of collusion with Russia, and there was not an ounce of evidence of collusion. And so he keeps making baseless allegations time after time. We passed a resolution, by the way, on the floor. Well, it didn't pass, but we had a vote on the floor to censure Chairman Schiff for the things that he's done to subvert transparency and to mislead the American people.
And you also had a resolution, Joint Resolution 77, right, that opposing the president's action to get our troops out of that war in Syria. You voted for it. I don't understand why.
Well, it's really more focused on what is the end game with containing ISIS. We've got ISIS, and President Trump's been very aggressive at taking the fight to ISIS with a coalition of countries, but also working with the Kurds to finally get ISIS at bay. We know that there are thousands, maybe as many as 7,000 plus, in addition to their family, who are being held in prisons. We want to make sure that they don't get released from those prisons. There are reports of jailbreaks of those ISIS terrorists.
How are you going to do that?
And we talked to the president. Well, we talked to the
Congressman?
president at the meeting, actually, about that. That was one of the topics that we talked about. Pelosi stormed out before we could get into the details of it.
Yeah.
But ultimately, after she left, we did. And again, there were still some Democrats in the room where the president laid out what his plan is right now to make sure that we can contain those terrorists, because we don't want them to run loose.
I want to understand this, Congressman. I really do. 94% of Republicans in poll after poll support the President of the United States. The people who voted for him in 2016 voted for him with this promise on the table, that he was going to get our troops out of wars in which they did not belong, out of international police actions, precisely the description of, I think, northern Syria. Isn't it time to start following this president? I mean, I don't understand it. The Republicans,
Well,
I would think you guys would say, you know, Nancy Pelosi is for it. I sure as hell better be against it.
Well, there's a lot of things she's for that we have been fighting, including standing up to Iran, which this president's doing, reversing that bad Iran deal. Pelosi was for that Iran deal. We, of course, opposed it. I stand with President Trump in what he's doing there, what he's doing to China, what he's doing, by the way, to stand up to Russia. When President Obama would not sell those Javelin missiles to the Ukraine, our friends that wanted to stop Russian aggression, Obama wouldn't sell them the missiles. Trump did. When President Trump got elected, he sold those missiles right away so that they can push back on Russian aggression. That was mentioned in the Zelensky phone call. So this president has stood up to Russia. He stood up to all the bad actors of the world, from North Korea to China to Iran. And I think it's one of the reasons why his foreign policy doesn't get a lot of credit. Look at what he's doing in Israel, standing up to our ally there, too. So Pelosi can have the socialist debate on the left, and you're seeing it in the presidential debate. You're going to see next year a real debate between freedom versus socialism, and it's playing itself out. But the voters should decide that next year, not Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff behind closed doors like they're trying to do with this impeachment witch hunt. It's a hoax,
do you
and people
think the
know it.
voters, congressmen, are going to ask of congressmen running for re-election, what did you do for the president at the moment in which he needed the greatest support, that he needed people standing shoulder to shoulder with him instead of voting with the damn Democrats on a resolution that, by the way, let's put this up. The American people, Republicans, in the most recent survey, by 57% approve of that troop withdrawal, Congressman. And you just went against 57% of the folks in that poll. You went against the president, who's been right on issue after issue, as you've just itemized, issue after issue in which he's been correct. How in the world can you comfortably line up with Lindsey Graham, who was, by the way, remember, he wanted to work for President Obama along with Senator McCain in Cairo to put in, to urge President Sisi to put the Muslim Brotherhood, for crying out loud, in the new Egyptian government. This is not a man who has great skill and a great record in foreign policy.
Well, and I wasn't for that. And like I said, we were at the White House today to talk through some of those issues and, frankly, to come to agreement on things like imposing tougher sanctions on Turkey, which we're in agreement on. In fact, that was one of the items that the president talked with us about, those of us that remained, at least, in the meeting. And again, the rest of the meeting was very productive once Speaker Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Steny Hoyer stormed out. And there were still some Democrats remaining. But ultimately, you've got a president who has done, I think, yeoman's work at standing up to the really bad actors around the world. It would be nice if we had some of our friends around the world helping more in that effort. At least some of our NATO allies are stepping up more, but there's a lot more they can do. And ultimately, we're going to keep fighting and making sure that they don't try to impeach a president with no high crimes and misdemeanors, absolutely nothing that they've laid out. They just don't agree with the results of the election. That's where ultimately people have to stand with the president, and we're fighting that battle as we speak.
I would hope that his own conference in the House of Representatives would stand with him. Imagine, Congressman, how much more that would strengthen him around the world as he conducts the most successful foreign policy in 3 decades, certainly. Congressman Steve Scalise, great to see you, and thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Great being with you, Lou. Thanks.